problems in America. In fact, he ended up closing his business in Brookings, Oregon, moved to New York, and went into international trading, which is what he really knew how to do, because he was always in the office.
Right.
So I was on my own. I started school. Hank and I owned 2 cars. We had an old 38 Hudson, and we had a 67 Pontiac convertible. Thought it was a beauty, so we owned them together. Whoever had the date got the Pontiac. and so we sold our cars. And so when I left Oregon, I had $400 because of when I sold the car. That's what I left home, and I worked all my way through college on my own.
It's pretty spectacular.
But to us, it was natural. It was,
Right.
yeah, it was just natural.
When I asked my dad, parent, should I go to college? And he looked at me and said, weren't you listening? You're on your own. You decide.
Up to you. What do you want to
It's
do?
up to you. And so the closest college was from Brookings is Ashland, Southern Oregon College. And so I went to Southern Oregon College, and those were good years where if you had graduated with a degree from an accredited high school, you were automatically accepted into college. But the first thing you do is take an exam to see where you are. And it was in English and mathematics and whatever. And you were graded from 1 to 10. And I came in at a 3, which is very low. And so the counselor said, are you sure you want to go to college? You didn't do very well. And I recollect my story because I said to him, now wait a minute, sir. I am coming here because I think I need to be educated. You give me a test that proves I need to be educated.
Yeah.
But because I need to be educated, you don't want me to come to school.
Wait a minute.
He said,
Brilliant logic.
you're okay. You'll make it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, he offered me a place to stay at his home.
That's pretty nice.
I'd like to just
Yes,
bring up
please.
the matter of Jewish people. I want you all to know, during the war in Holland, one of our uncles helped hide out a Jewish doctor. The German Gestapo took him in for questioning. They kept him for several days. We don't know what they did to him, but he died 2 days later.
Wow.
So that's something to kind of keep in your mind.
Yeah.
On my end, I was going to high school. When I came from England, they looked at my curriculum when I came to the United States from England, and they saw that I had already taken Latin and French. I was coming in as a sophomore. They gave me a lot of credits. So at the end of my sophomore year, I decided, hey, I can go to be a senior, skip my junior year, which was not a very wise thing to do, but my parents thought that was great. I could skip a year and get out of the house sooner. So I did. I was the second youngest person in Oregon State. I was 16 years old, and there was a girl my age. And I frankly didn't do very well. Opened up my eyes to see all the beautiful girls there. The liberty of being away from home. So.
And you bought a motorcycle?
I'm sorry?
You bought a motorcycle?
Yes. Well, I had a car fact, the first car I had was a Model T Ford. I bought it for $48.
$48?
$48. And I ran it for a while, and I wanted something a little sexier, so I found a 35 DeSoto convertible with a rumble seat.
Nice.
The engine was kind of shot, but that didn't seem to bother me. I sold the Model T to 12 girls. My sister Mary, in her hall, these girls decided they wanted to paint the car for every football game a different color. So I had to teach them how to drive it, because the Model T Ford doesn't drive like a normal car. But one time I was going in my DeSoto, and I saw a guy beside a motorcycle hitchhiking. We stopped. I picked him up. He was out of gas, so I told him, I'll get you some gas. And I said, he looked around the car, he says, you know, I've been wanting a car like this to build a hot rod out of it. And I said, well, I've been wanting a motorcycle. Anyway, we traded.
So good. Oh, it's really cool. All right, we're down. Let's see now. Someone else has got. Who's up? Oh, she's ready. Oh, yeah.
Okay, when you were a kid or a teenager, did you get in trouble?
Well, Jack.
I ran away from home.
Twice.
We
You get in
had
trouble with the
a
law.
mixed upbringing. Anyway, I have some memories that maybe I don't want to talk about. But we grew up at a time when corporal punishment was normal. So, have you ever seen these wire things that they use to hit carpets with? Okay, anyway, use your imagination, because that's what they used on me, because I was not very obedient. I was a real pain in the neck. But I'm trying to think of what the question is more.
What did you do to get in
These
trouble?
kind of troubles that we get into.
Nothing serious. This is complicated. I was in, Ed and I, Pete went off to boarding school in England.
In England. He was never home, yeah.
And we went to a grammar school, it was called, in Leeds. It was a smaller grammar school, not far from our home. And there was, the best school in high school was Leeds Grammar School, but you had to take an entrance exam to get into the school. So we both took the entrance exam. Ed passed it, I flunked, so I had to stay in West Leeds High School, and he went on to a middle school at that time.
Leeds Grammar School, yeah.
And one of the things that I was caught throwing furniture out of the 3 stories. Anyway, I like to watch it go and crack. So yes, I did do some things. As an aside, the next year I took the entrance exam again, and I passed it that time. And in England they have a business of, you don't have grades, you have what they call forms. Where's Alistair? Am I saying it right?
Yep.
And I ended up a form higher than Ed. So for 2, and I ended up in high school and he was still in middle school. So for 2 years we went to different schools together. But that's an aside. So I did something right.
Very good.
I was a good boy.
He was a favorite. Our stepmother was very fond of Ed.
Okay. When you came to America from England, what was the school experience like here, having moved from another country?
Well, the first thing is not speaking a word of English.
No, I'm not coming to America.
America.
She said from,
Well, you or both.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I
It's
misunderstood.
okay.
I was thinking from Holland to England, so you can imagine sitting in a class, not understanding a word being said, and the only thing, arithmetic, was the only subject that we understood, but you assimilate and you learn very fast.
And then when you came to the United States, well, you kind of shared some of it because you ended up going to college when he was 16. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want getting into trouble. It was the end of the term, and we were drinking beer, and we ran out, so I volunteered. Now, I was 17 at this time, and the drinking age was 21. So I went downtown, I got a case of beer, and I ran a stop sign. A policeman put on the red light behind me. I had enough beers in me, so I thought I could outrun him. It was in a rather crowded area, so I ran several stop signs, and he was kind of catching up to me. So I finally decided I'd stop. I stopped. He came around the corner. He jumped the curb, and his bumper got stuck on the fire hydrant. So I was already out of the car. So the two of us picked up the bumper, got him through, and he said, "What in the hell were you doing?" I'm sorry, the end of term, and he gave me a big lecture and let me go. I've always remembered that. I ended up 29 years in law enforcement. I've always remembered that, to give somebody a break.
I always looked at Pete as being either in law enforcement or he'd be a criminal. And he chose the high end. He chose the high road. You know, you've asked about career, and we've taken quite different careers.
So why don't you talk about them?
Well, I can only talk about my own.
Well, yes, you can talk about your
And
own.
one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is that I've been through some deep, deep disappointments in life. And I won't get into the details, but I ended up in naval cadet, became an aviator, or tried to be an aviator, but I didn't get a commission because I only had 2 years of college. But I needed 2 years of college and needed to be a citizen, became a citizen. Margie's mom swore at Jackson County Courthouse that she knew who I was and all that sort of thing. And I got kicked out of flight school. Not school, I completed flight school, was ready to get my wings, and flunked a physical. And it's a long, complicated story. But
Flat feet?
I beg your pardon?
Flat feet? Eyesight.
It was, I flunked an eye test. And the reason I'm sharing it is that years later, when I was in the insurance business, I was flying a Hughes West airplane from Portland to Las Vegas. And I noticed the guy in the second seat was one of the students in my flight school. And here he was, an airline pilot. And so we had, after the flight, we had a cup of coffee together and we started talking about old times. And I realized that what a blessing it was for me to be kicked out of flight school, because the other aviators that passed, that went to jets, multi-engine, ended up in the Vietnam War, and I didn't. And so that was a blessing. And I've had other incidents in life where things that look really grim turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you.
Would that be like a lesson in terms of like failure and coming and seeing maybe like, you know, silver lining and things?
Yeah, very much so. That is the message that I'm trying to say, and I'm doing it in real terms. I mean, I worked for a company which was had you ever heard of a company called Haloid Corporation?
Sure.
No.
Are you saying sure because you know who it was?
No.
Sorry, no.
Haloid Corporation invented a copy process called xerography, so they changed their name to Xerox. So I worked for Xerox, and it's a long, complicated story, but I got fired from Xerox. Now, can you imagine being
Can we
fired?
ask how did you get fired?
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to dominate the whole
Yeah,
evening.
that's a good story.
It's a
good story.
I was a territorial salesman, and then I was promoted in Eugene, Oregon. I was promoted to become the marketing manager in Portland. And so we moved from Eugene to Portland on Xerox's money. And we just fine. And at that time, Xerox did not sell copy machines. They leased them. They rented them and had a meter, and you paid by the copy. But the Haloid Corporation at Rochester, New York, got sold photocopy paper for photocopy machines. So all the counties in the United States had photocopy machines, and then they had an automatic machine that would have a platen, and you take a picture of your document, and then it would go through a developer and a wash and a dry. And the Xerox process replaced that. But we still had a budget to sell so much photocopy paper. And my territory when I was in Eugene was most of Oregon except Salem and Portland. And I went to Klamath Falls, and I called on the county clerk there to sell him a Xerox machine. And he had just lost his election for county clerk. And a woman had got elected to be county clerk, and she ran on using photographic, I'm doing it wrong. But the point is, what am I trying to say?
How did you get fired?
What? What is it when you microfilming documents? And there's a word for it.
Microfiche.
Microfiche, that was it, microfiche. She ran on converting the Klamath County to microfiche from this old-fashioned. And he said to me, he said, Hank, he said, I would like to buy a new photocopy machine. I said, well, wait a minute, you've already got one. He said, I know, but I want to burn up all the money that she was going to use to buy Microfiche and spend it on a machine. I'm going to show her, just because I lost the election doesn't mean I can't do that in spite. So lo and behold, the machine cost $16,000, and that was a lot of money. And my commission on it was like $1,200–1,300. You know, I said, well, if you force me to take the damn thing, to do it, I took the order. So they sent the order to Rochester, New York, and Rochester says, wait a minute, we don't make these anymore, but if you've got an order, I guess we have to go make one. And I said, Terrace, it's very good. Eastern Oregon, Harney County, all that area, still were using old photocopy machines that were manually done. So the salesman out of Boise was in Harney County and said, you know, I can get you a photocopy machine pretty cheap if you would continue buying paper from me, because that was what we do. So it's a long, complicated story, but our branch manager said, why don't you take this old machine we took out of Klamath and send it to Harney County? Well, about that time, Xerox was going a mile a minute, and I mean, it was really growing. And we had a new administrative guy, and I think our branch manager wasn't very bright, frankly. And we were about to execute it, and this new administrative guy called the zone, which was down in Los Angeles, and said, the guys in Portland are selling you used equipment. And Xerox we don't sell used equipment. So months later, an airplane came in, a zone manager, and a CPA, and all these people, and they fired the branch manager, they fired me, they fired Strasser, the salesman, and they fired another salesman, all together, and they even fired the technical rep that cleaned up the machine. I said, and so can you imagine, with 4 little children, I came home to Margie and said, I've been fired. She gave me a big hug and said, thank God. I didn't like Xerox anyway. That's true. I'll never forget that. You know. And I did go back, and all the other people could take care of themselves, but the tech rep, the guy that I had ordered to clean the machine, and because he cleaned it, he got fired. I said to the zone manager, I'll sue you bastards before you fire him. That's wrong. That's immoral. And they didn't. They kept him. But but you can talk about ups and downs in life. But let me tell you the blessings that came. Xerox stock was like, those were the days when it's like Amazon stock or Google stock today. And the day we went to work for Xerox, we took $50 a month out of 400. We didn't make that much money, and invested it in Xerox stock. And it was Xerox stock that took off, that put me in the insurance business. Because I went into the insurance business saying, nobody's ever going to have the power to fire me again. I'm going to work for myself. If I'm a loser, I'll be a loser, but no one else is going to fire me. And anyway, that's the way I'm made up. And I think Ed has some of that. You've always kind of worked for yourself.
Oh yeah, the idea that I work, I didn't mind working for someone as a kid, but as an adult, I wasn't going to work for anybody. And so that's when I was interested in the health field, and I was introduced to chiropractic, and I didn't know anything about it, but I almost think there's a guiding star than I had. So when I was 17 years old, I drove out to Davenport, Iowa, with $400 in my pocket. In those days, tuition was like $35 a month. It wasn't that much. Lived in a boarding house, worked. I worked all the way through school, and except for one summer, I had the most glorious summer ever. 4 of us, all students, we got an old pickup, and we drove to California, Oregon, California, and we camped out for the summer in Baja California. In those days, you could go south of Ensenada and San Vicente, and there were coves. We'd dive in the water, and we'd go into a cave, and it would be covered with bugs, lobster. And so we ate all the lobster we wanted. When it was too rough to fish, or we spearfished, not with guns, but with a pole and elastic. And we ate pink abalone that was so abundant. Anyway, and then we used to go out, and I'm embarrassed, we would go out to some of the farms outside of Ensenada, San Vicente, and we would raid some farmers. We saw like a grapevine. We were picking his grapes. And suddenly it was about 6:37, and as we were doing this, a shadow came over us, and here was this huge bearded Russian farmer. He says, "You boys are picking the wrong grapes. There's good ones over here." And so he invited us. He heard we were students. He had a house. We never went in it. He had a soddy with dirt floor, adobe walls, and that's where he lived. And he invited us for supper, fresh brown bread, vegetables, and butter. And so we asked him about hunting. So he said, "Oh, you boys stay here." So we parked our truck on his farm. Next morning, he sent out one of his men who was a guide to let us go hunting. All because we started to steal his grapes. Roscoff was his name. And later, I guess certain shells were hard, so we sent him some ammunition but it was a wonderful experience.
I'll tell an interesting story on Ed. When he graduated from Palmer School of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa, and decided that he'd like to practice in California. So when he went to California, he found out that you had to be 21 years old to become a doctor. So he couldn't get his license to practice chiropractic. So as I heard the story, he ended up with selling pots and pans on the street in Los Angeles.
We used to, in those days, stainless steel, fancy pots and pans were beautiful, and we would go outside of office buildings when young ladies were coming out who were working, we would look for girls who had an engagement ring. And then we would try to make an appointment and sell them, because college girls were a waste of time. But girls who were working girls who were engaged were good prospects. And I actually made a pretty good living selling cookware. So
before he could become a chiropractor.
That is a shock.
We had to take some additional schooling in California, so. And then during the Christmas, I worked at a fancy men's store selling, and I was selling ties. So people would come in for ties, and I'd say, well, you know, we've got some nice shirts over here, let's go over here. And I did very well. And when the Christmas season ended, the manager came, we'd like to hire you, you know, not just for Christmas. Well, that was, you know, out of the question, so. So we had an interesting experience.
My career is entirely different. When I was in school and the Korean War started, I was looking for excitement, and there's nothing more exciting than combat. So I thought I'd like to join up and see combat, see what it's like. So I listening to the movies, the John Wayne movies, the Marine Corps. I went to the recruiting office in Eugene, to the Marine Corps, and they asked me about my citizenship, and I told them I was still an alien. And then they asked me if I had the first papers for citizenship, and I said no. And the Marine sergeant said, I'm sorry, we can't take you in the Marine Corps. You have to be a citizen or have your first papers. He said, but if you want to go to another gung-ho outfit, join the paratroopers. So that's how I ended up in the Army Airborne. I got through my parachute training, and the epitome of a paratrooper experience is to jump behind the enemy lines. But at the time in Korea, there were no airborne outfits. The only airborne outfit was the 187th RCT in Japan. So they said, well, if you want to see combat, volunteer for any unit, and then when the airborne goes back on what they call the line, back into combat, you can change over. And so in the meantime, you still got what they call your jump status. So I ended up in Korea with the 40th Infantry, which is a National Guard outfit. And I was very lucky. When I reported for duty on the front line, I expected to be put in a squad. I was a staff sergeant, but having no previous combat experience, I thought I'd be putting in a squad as a rifleman. The company commander saw my jump wings, and he said, I'm going to put you in as assistant platoon sergeant. So I ended up, which is probably the best position to have on the front line, because you're mostly responsible for logistics. Anyway, make a long story short, I ended up as a platoon sergeant and later on as acting platoon leader. One time, one of the Korean soldiers we had with us, they had a terrific flood. He lost his house, he lost his wife and one of his children, and he asked if he could go on leave. So we all felt sorry for him. We collected $200, and they don't, in overseas they have script. They don't want dollars floating around there. So we had the script, we gave him the script, and the Koreans weren't supposed to have it. He got stopped at a checkpoint. The MPs took the money from him, didn't give him a receipt, and he came back, and we got him 10 days leave. He came back on the front line, and we said, what are you doing here? He said, well, he took all my money. And so I was requisitioned a Jeep, went down there, and I got the MPs to admit that, yes, they took his money, but the money was in the safe, nobody had the combination. And I kind of resolved there that if I ever go into law enforcement, I would make sure that justice is served. So when I got out of the service, I ended up in the Border Patrol. And interestingly enough, when I was getting my citizenship, I had to go for the an interview, and the interviewer, I was still in the Army at the time, he asked me what my plans were, and I said, well, I want to get out of the Army. And I said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to get into law enforcement, I'd like to work outdoors. So he said, have you heard of the Border Patrol? I said, no. So anyway, I put in for the Border Patrol while I was still an alien. And I ended up in the Border Patrol. Got interested in flying, and ended up flying for the Border Patrol. Customs started a new air support branch. I ended up flying for Customs. When drug enforcement was formed in 1973, I went over, flew for drug enforcement, and then went back to Customs.
When you were a paratrooper though, you ended up on Time Magazine.
I'm sorry.
Page. Wasn't that when you were still a paratrooper in the service? You were on Time Magazine for erecting a flag or something?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
You were
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what happened, we were on the front line, the furthest north into Korea of any place in the front line. And we were on top of where two mountains met each other, and we were on top. And we had the American flag flying, and it was the most northerly place on the whole front line where we had the American flag flying. And Life magazine did an article about this. The flag belonged to a friend of mine, another master sergeant with another platoon, and he got a write-up. So he wrote a letter to Life saying that actually it was knocked down. I'm the one that put it